chatting today about narrative business strategies and how that works and what that's going to be going on. So this is the 4th video in the series, and if you've missed any of this stuff, please go back and watch them, because you're not going to make sense of some of the stuff that we're doing. But where we're getting to is we're down to the last 2, and we're defining the story, theme, plots and structures, as well as telling the hero story. So we're going to unpack that for you today, and then next week the final thing is we're going to start telling marketing stories, and we're going to unpack that one, and we're going to follow that one up in August with a number of example marketing stories that will put this all together and give you some examples to get that. So we've chosen a number of really good stories that we've told with clients, and once we get there, okay, we'll get either them to tell the story or I'll come on and show and share their stories with you. So what is this all about? Let's unpack this a little bit. Is that by now you should have your characters defined, and the characters are firstly your company character. Who is your company? Where do they find that? Your different products that you have. And last week we spoke about defining your client personas and converting those personas into actual characters from this board. And you got a number of that. We use the story cards that we've got and all the character cards that we've got here, and define all from the list in front of you, and each one is clearly defined on what role they play, what they're good at, what they're bad at, where to use them if they're a product, where to use them if they're a client, and help that unpack. So from those characters, then you choose the 3 main characters, of course, your hero and the villain and the princess. And the hero's only a hero because he's got a princess to rescue and overcome the villain. And the villain is only a villain because there's a hero standing in the way of what his agenda is. And so the battle between good and evil and the dark side and the light side come together, and it's the magic triangle of all stories, because without a villain in the way, the hero is just a romantic guy and stuff. So he's got to face some hardship to learn those lessons and overcome himself, plus the obstacle to win the heart of the princess. And now where we get there is we go back to the story board that we have. So this is your template that you have, and we've marked all the areas that we have there. So we have the hero, the princess, and the villain, and we have all the supporting characters, and we've defined the product and the customer characters. So what do we want to do? We want to put this all together now. We want to wrap it up into a neat little bundle. So first of all, I want to talk to you about the story structure. There's 3 blocks in the middle, the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And for that, what we do is we look at the hero's story formula. And this is a set formula. It's nothing to do with me. This comes out of Hollywood and defined, and a lot of the movie scripts and a lot of the movie script schooling is taught exactly around this formula. Because if you know this formula and the 12 steps around that, you can't go wrong in telling a story. So we just want to summarize that. We don't have time here to go through all different 12 sections. We ask you, if you're really interested in telling good, deep stories, to come and chat to us afterwards, and we'll walk you through a storytelling workshop, which we run. So the high level stuff, that's just basic. You can see that it's got Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 along the bottom. It's split up into different chapters, different plot points, and it follows a rhythm like a music score. There's certain story beats that happen, and every so often you've got to have one of those story beats with a something that goes and follow that rhythm through there, and then you define different chapters by having plot points. And a plot point is either a high or a low or a dramatic situation. It could be that phone call, it could be the car crash, it could be seeing each other across the room and understanding how that comes together. So let's give you the outline of the story. Act 1 of the hero's journey goes something like this. Well, once upon a time, something and something and something. And this is where you set the scene. Once upon a time, you want to set the scene. Firstly, you want to introduce the main characters in Once Upon a Time. And you also want to set the environment. So once upon a time, on a marshy swamp in the middle of August, just before the winter's reign, there lived a family. The family of 5, a mother, a father, 2 kids, and a grandfather. And that's the once upon a time. And then you want to relate what they did and what the norm is, because a story can only happen once you know where they're launching from. So this is your launch pad. Once upon a time, every day, this family went out and they farmed and they grazed their cattle and they chased their chickens and they made a living and they were able to cooperate with the rest of the town folk and etc., etc. And you can then pull that out. And what that does is it just sets the scene there. Act 1 finishes with a plot point, something that happens. It's a dramatic event. It's something that changes the once upon a time, everyday scenario. Until one day this happened. Until one day there was a knock on the door. There was that phone call, or the mother got a letter in the post, or something that changes from the everyday scenario where happily ever after they could live. And this act is a story on its own, and we so often hear a lot of people sharing on social media their act 1s of, I was just a normal person and then today I've got retrenched. And they share this dramatic story about this, or, I've just got engaged, or somebody's just died, or I've just got a results from the doctor, and that's where they leave it. And the story's not over in Act 1, and you've got to learn how to tell the story through to be able to get that. But the Act 1 is I suppose, a story with a bad ending all on its own. And a lot of people that they share, a lot of stories we hear in network groups and social circles around a braai or online are all about Act 1s. And it's a little hard to leave it there because now people want to know what happens. And if it's your story, you can make it happen. So that's Act 1 of a story. Think about some of the movies that you've watched recently. Now, this one, if we go back to the formula, you can see that Act 1 finishes within 25% of the movie. So we're looking at about 15, 20 minutes into a movie. Look for that plot point. Look for that dramatic setup. Dish, and that happens. And there we get to that. You can almost clock it if you sit there with a watch, and you can time movies. If you know a movie is 90 minutes, you can actually plot 25% off that, and almost to the second you'll see something happen that changes the happily ever after ending. That could well be that. And so we go into Act 2. Now the role of Act 2 is the middle part. It's the body of the story and comprises of a huge chunk of the time, but it's a cycle story. It's a story that goes round and round and round, because depends on what you want the characters to learn and where you're going to emerge your hero or dethrone your false hero or upgrade your false villain into a hero or change the princess. So those characters are intermingled, and you can think of some of the stories that you've heard and some of the films that you've watched, is that often the person you think is going to be the winner ends up being the loser, and the person you should be the villain ends up being the hero at the end. So you can play around with those stuff there once you get good at telling the stories. Basic stories, keep the hero, keep the villain, keep the princess, and move towards that. So what this is your hero goes through cycle. And because of this, remember that's because of the dramatic event, that phone call, that knock on the door. Because of this, then this happens. And they've thrown a curveball in life. Things have gone pear-shaped, and now they need to journey to overcome that. And they prepare for war. They, have to sell their house. They have to do this. They, whatever it is, it's that initial preparation. The young boy packs his backpack and sets out on a quest, whatever it is there. And so your journey of the hero creation and the evolution of your hero starts in Act 2. And you cycle through different things. And if you look at the Lord of the Rings, there's 12 hours of movie, and 90% of it is Act 2, where little hobbits have to go on this journey, and they're learning, and they're overcoming, and they're facing new levels of threat, and the threat gets deeper and darker, and so they grow, and they're getting braver and braver and braver. And when the hobbits left their little shire, they were humble little creatures, scared of their own shadow and scared of going further than the fence. And if you look at the end of the movie, they're warriors and they're heroes, and they songs are written about them. And so that's what it is. You've got to build that up, and it kind of goes because of this, and because of that, and because of that, and then because of that, then this happened. And so you build your character up. Now, it's important that Act 2, somewhere along the line, you get to a point of no return. And that can be a good thing, or it can be a bad thing. And a lot of the dramatic movies and the dramatic stories we get to is you get to the end of Act 2, and there's this wonderful thing when all hope is lost. All right, and just look at the various movies. If you look at The Matrix, this is when Neo dies and stuff, and we thought we'd found the chosen one, and he's dead, and he's fighting with the guy there, and he gets shot and he dies, and everyone's kind of looking and saying, but surely there's still movie left over, and what about the sequel? How can the hero die? And then we get to the next act. But you can see that kind of plot point. This is when all hope is lost, when the person thinks they've escaped, but then they're held at gunpoint, or they've, overcome their final obstacle, but then they fling open the door to safety, and there's a guy standing there to recapture them. Or they've just rescued the girl out of the fire, but then she dies of smoke inhalation. And it's a really interesting point. And if you stop the movie there, if you stopped your story there, it would be a dramatic downer for a lot of the stories. But there's a third act. There is hope. And we then bring in there. So Act 3 is literally fade to darkness, re-come to the next scene, and because all hope is lost, now what? And this is the point. This is the turning point where the hero becomes the ultimate hero. He's able to apply all the skills that he's learned. He's about to apply all the wisdom that he's learned, and he's able to collate all the networks and the tools and his armory, whatever it is there, and he's now able to face his adversary and overcome, until finally one day he's able to get to that point. Now he becomes a true hero. He's not a struggling hero. He's a hero returned from his quest, from his journey, from his time of education and growth. And then he's able to do that. And the story doesn't end there. A lot of stories do that. He's like, hey, he overcome the battle. But the key thing to a true story, a true wrap up and a closure of that, is that you need to go back to once upon a time, every day, this and this happened. And ever since he's learned that, he now is able to do that. So a lot of stories allow the hero, the little boy that left home with a backpack, he returns back to the farm on the swamp with his mom and his dad and his sister and his grandfather. And he's now learned the skills on how to overcome those issues that they faced. And they might have lost some family members and some limbs and some resources along the way. But that's the key thing. Ever since then, this family now lives still on the swamp, but a lot better, a lot wiser, a lot richer a lot more fulfilled as they are. And that is the formula for a good story. If you're able to take Act 1 and Act 3 and put them together, it should tell just a shortened version of the story, that précis of the story. One day there was a family that lived on the swamp, and every day they did that. Then they got a knock on the door, and the boy had to leave home. And when he came back, he was filled with all this wisdom, and they were able to, I don't know, drain the swamp and plant lilies. And to be able to go there. So you see the story structure. It's very important to learn how to tell those stories. The key thing here for businesses is how to tell a 90-minute story in 90 seconds. And that's what we're going to talk about next week, is that how to put that in there and how to get that formulation right, and how to put that all together in a good, invoking, emotional 90-second story, still in 3 acts. So that's where we go. So what are the different story plots? Well, we've got the story cards, and the story cards come in also multiple kind of things, and they look at what is the quest, overcoming the monster. There's a comedy or tragedy, a voyage and return, a rebirth, rags to riches, and each one is slightly different plot. It's the same story, but it's the plot that changes. And you can think of some examples of stories about quests that they've gone on. Lord of the Rings is a good quest that the guys come on. Overcoming the monster could be overcoming an adversary, overcoming an illness, overcoming a relationship, overcoming the lawyer, the court case, being falsely accused, and overcoming a mountain that you need to do. Okay, comedy is a comedy, and a tragedy is a tragedy. And the voyage and return is also a nice one, where somebody, a little boy that left the farm and he went on a voyage, and through the voyage he went there to find himself and stuff, and then he returns with all that wisdom. A rebirth as well is that same sort of thing, but slightly different. It's about recreating the person. Maybe the boy left home, limping with a bad leg, and he came back a martial arts hero because he spent time on top of a mountain with a wise guru or something. He learned new skills and went to law school and came back a lawyer, and he was reborn, and he changes his attitude towards things, and we can do that. And then rags to riches. There's so many rags to riches movie, Pretty Woman, Slumdog Millionaire, and all those sort of times where the guy starts off there and the hero is this downtrodden person, and then he learns new skills and comes back as a super wealthy person. But it's not always about money. A rags to riches could be emotional rags to riches. It could be relational. It could be family. So there's a number of ways to tell that. So there's just the different story plots, and there's so much depth in there. We could sit here and chat all day. But let's move on to the format of the story. But now you've got your story. How do you tell it? And you're not always just telling it from beginning to end. There's a number of ways. And again, the mountain is the ups and downs, the peaks and the valleys of high emotion, low emotion, and you can have a number of that throughout as your theme goes there. You can have different converging ideas. A documentary almost, where you've got kind of an idea over here, and then you go over there, and then you go there, and eventually they all come together. And there's this person sitting on the West Coast and this person on the East Coast, and they go into a conference and they miss each other in the lobby, and then they get there, and eventually you can do that. So you've got that kind of converging ideas, or different spark lines. Great for factual things. You can just throw out different ideas, but they all revolve around a central theme or a central concept. Or documentary or law stories or something like that are really good there. Or you can have nested loops, which is just a kind of if you got your pen and just did a number of loops where you kind of go round and round and round. Sleepless in Seattle is a great way to example of this, is that you're just telling that same sort of story over and over again, but that Groundhog Day type thing, and eventually that loop is closed, and you go, yes, there is a story, and you close it off in the end. My favorite one that I'm practicing a lot is this thing called in media res, where you tell the story from the halfway point, and you choose one of the defining plot points in the middle of the movie in the story, and then you go back to the beginning. There was a knock at the door and they opened the door and there was the man that they were expecting. But who was that man? Then we go back 6 months before that man first came across, and then you tell their story. A lot of the CSI TV programs are like this, where they show the murder and it goes like, 36 hours earlier or 72 hours earlier, this and this happened. That's that technique. And it works beautifully because you've already grabbed that person's attention and now they need an explanation. So you go back and explain, you get back to that plot point, and then you finish off that story. So that dramatic thing at the end of Act 2, you can actually start the story right there and catch the attention of the people with that. The petal structure as well, very much like the nested loop. You've got various stories around the central theme, and then you've got a false start. False start is always great to have the people, well, actually this is what it's like, but no, it didn't happen. Yeah, so there I was at a race and the gun went and I ran and I ran and I ran and I came first. No, I didn't. Actually what happened is the gun went and I tripped and I fell. But I got up, and this is my journey of the greatest race of my life. And so you can tell that story with a false start. So you're almost leading people from the same beginning, but you go way off left, but then you come back and no, that's not what happened. This is what happens, and you're able to do that. A good way to capture that, often used in humor, very difficult to do and get right because people get confused if you don't do this correctly. So I leave that one out there for the advanced stories that we can tell, but playing around with some of the others, really good idea to get that. Wow, we've thrown a lot at you in the last 20 minutes. So coming back to our story structure board, we've ticked all the boxes. We've now got our story theme, we've got our story plot, and we're putting that together, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. But there's a little block there at the bottom right-hand corner called the moral of the story. And without the moral of the story, your story falls flat. Now, it's so interesting is I was doing a course of Pixel animation studios, and they were saying is that in the movie Up, remember the house with all the balloons and the old man and the little scout boy and things like that, and they defined the moral up front like they should and like they did and stuff. And it was interesting, only when they got through to the story did they see that there was another moral that they didn't even know was there, that emerged, and it was so much stronger, so much better. If you go watch the movie again there, it's that moment when that old man sitting in his rocking chair on the porch with his new house and his new location realizes that it's not about the location. It's about, I'll let you go watch the movie. Watch that point there. And for the guys who made the movie, it's not like it was an accidental that the actors were just sort of going there. These guys made the movie, but it changed because at that point they suddenly realized that was the convergence and the moral of the whole story. And it's amazing. It's so powerful. I love animation movies because they're made for adults. Kids of all ages, and it's phenomenal the different layers of morals that they can do. But ultimately the story moral is why the hero did what he did to get what he got and what he learned along the way. And if you're defining that, and we're going to start off with that next week, is when we start looking at your marketing videos, is that what does your product give and what do people need to do in order to get what they need in order to fulfill their life, that void that your product or service offers. Oh, some interesting stuff, eh? Deep stuff. Anyway, so here we are. I've got some actions for you like a good coach. There's always homework, okay? Start defining the structure of your story. Select the right plot, select or try different formats. And it's nice because you can tell the same story in 6 or 7 different formats and find the one that works. Sit down with people. And I say, tell your story, tell it again and again and again and again and again. And the nice thing about it, we got his friend Richard, he says, the more he tells the story, the more it becomes real and the greater the exaggeration gets. And he says most of his stories were all created out of some form of truth somewhere along the line. And the more he tells them, you emphasize the point that captures attention, and you stop that part where people kind of roll their eyes and stuff. And so your story will emerge and evolve into a real entertaining, marketing, emotional, grabbing story. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be just 90 seconds. And we'll share some of the most powerful stories that you've had in stuff. We did an exercise with people, write a story in 3 words. Now we're really pushing the boundaries, but it's so true. You can have an emotional story in 5 or 3 words. And, we've summed it down even to 1 word. He said, what is your story? Loved or rejected. And that's a story that's just so powerful in 1 word. And people associate with that, and people are able to understand that and put that together. So storytelling has to be and will be the future of marketing in businesses. And so many people are jumping on this bandwagon and learning how to tell stories. And we here have positioned ourselves as master storytellers. And stories make even the most boring tales come to life. If you translate that into small businesses, that stories make even the most boring products and services come to life and seem attractive. Next week, we'll share a story about concrete blocks that brought everybody in the room to tears. It was amazing. And if you can do that with concrete blocks, we can do it with your business. And we've done it with so many others, and we're doing it with our own. And it's amazing just to see how that collates and comes together. So my name is Bruce Wade, and it's been awesome to spend half an hour with you. If you've got any ideas or you want to attend our workshops, please contact me, Bruce at emsolutions.co.za, or visit our website, emsolutions.co.za, and you can chat to us. We'd love to help you tell your story and get this right and make it happen. Next week, we start telling. We'll give you some example stories, and we're going to put these, we'll video them and put them up on Facebook and on our blog, etc., for you to understand and get some good examples around all that. Until next week, I'm going to be here. If you want to ask any questions, you can do that. Otherwise, thank you for all of you joining me. If you've got anything else, then let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Have an awesome day. Cheers.